Seattle is, I think, about 2/3 single-family housing. Obviously, the affordability issue is huge. The other thing that's problematic is that we have not wanted to rock that boat. So we've ended up with a lot of denser housing on arterials that is not adjacent to open space, usable space, green space.
We're kind of the victims of our own success in that we have a supercharged economy filled with high-wage tech workers, and they've essentially distorted the housing market, bought up a lot of the houses, caused all housing prices to rise, and at the same time, we're not building enough to accommodate those people.
We might think that a retired boomer has a ton of money and is going to be able to live in a really wealthy neighborhood in Seattle, and maybe that's not the case. And so having a land use code that's very rigid doesn't allow for all of these complicated pathways to renting or homeowning.
We can't underscore the impact of the current zoning and regulatory scheme that we have now in terms of resulting in the underproduction of housing over the last several decades.
The new middle housing bill, HB 1110, requires all formerly single-family zoned areas to now accommodate either 2, 4, or 6 units per lot. While, yes, this is groundbreaking what the state has done, I think that we absolutely need to be honest in saying that this is not the solution to our housing crisis.
But we definitely need to expand our repertoire of housing types and recognize that the demographics are not what they once were either. You know, it's no longer mom and dad and 2.5 kids. People are opting to live in different ways for a lot of different reasons.
Housing that allow people to live closer to work, housing that are more affordable for young people who are transitioning from early career before they having families, housing that are maybe smaller in scale but closer to amenities spaces.
The US has certain things that are quite deep in our psyche about a front yard lawn and about our car, about our patch of land. We are rugged individualists and we have to move beyond that.
Today, the nuclear family structure is so not representative of how most people live. Over 40% of people in cities are single between, the ages of 25 and 50. There's not that many nuclear families that exist in a traditional setting, and our housing stock does not serve so many of the different types of family structures we see, and interest in community and interest in interaction.
Certainly Denmark and European culture is different than ours. Not coincidentally, they're one of the happiest nations on earth. We need to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, are some things keeping us from living differently that would actually benefit us?
The feeling of living in dense parts of Copenhagen, for example, where you have families that live in an apartment, you have incredible playgrounds that you live near, you can walk to everything, you don't need to own a car, you bike to most places. You have this richness to life and an ability as a parent with small kids to maintain your social networks because you can see your friends regularly. Everyone lives within walking distance.
I think it has to do a lot with open space. In the US, those open spaces get divided up, but everybody gets their own thing and there's gates and things like that. In the center of Copenhagen, which is a dense urban city, the housing sort of rings the perimeter. They go right up to the street edge, but then there's a big courtyard in the back and there's no fences or gates. And so de facto, big park in the heart of the block. And so everybody that lives at the perimeter has access to green space, trees, play area for the kids without having to walk to a park.
People want housing that meets their current needs and their lifestyle, and I think that can change over time. And that's one of the problems that we're seeing. There isn't those options for folks that want to maybe move to a smaller or larger unit. Maybe there are folks that want to live in the city with their family, but it's really hard to do because they can't find something that's affordable to them or provides a reasonable commute for them.
I think one of the biggest impediments to producing the housing today is just the number of things we have to solve. The codes just have gotten more complex and more demanding. I do think the permitting process by itself, just the amount of time that we spend in that process is excessive. And if you're not exceptional at it, or if you're actually trying something that's new, it ends up, creating a longer time than you might have predicted or expected.
Washington State has really onerous condo liability laws, which make it prohibitively expensive to build, to design, and to develop.
Since the financial crash in 2009, the regulations around construction lending have become very stringent, such that construction lenders need to use third-party appraisers to decide how much they can lend to a new project. No matter how much a construction lender believes in what you're doing, they rely on a third-party appraisal. And a third-party appraisal will always look at what's been sold that looks exactly like what you're building within a near radius of what you're building. And so if you're building a typology that doesn't exist yet or is slightly different from the norm, appraisers by law have to not take any risk.
I'd love to say that there's a lot of innovation in our housing market. There really isn't.
The least that we can do is to dispel some of the unfounded concerns that people raise when we start talking about upzoning, housing diversification. I think that we really lack a lot of great examples in this country.
I mean, I think there's a lot of examples of not human-oriented high-density areas. I think we can find a lot of those if we drive around the state. And so the fact that we don't always have good examples that we can point to and that people have when they think of it in their heads means that there are some really negative placeholders that people kind of imagine when they think of what density means.
The millennial generation is really eager to embrace upzoning. There's no doubt about it. I think the older generations had a different kind of lifestyle here in Seattle, and understandably, they have a hard time letting it go. But if they look at different ways of living as being maybe more equitable towards the upcoming generations, then there's hope that the dialogue can change. Something that we've seen a lot in our work is the sort of camps people can fall into of adding supply versus preservation and NIMBYism, and those sort of YIMBY and NIMBY movements that are antagonistic towards each other and can create this sort of almost self-righteousness amongst planners of we need to add housing, and amongst preservationists that don't change our community. I really believe in this sort of middle path of empathy and hearing the needs of people who are terrified of seeing their communities change, but creating policy that encourages the sort of gentle transformation where those communities actually can benefit or be involved, or where there's anti-displacement mechanisms built in. I really believe in that sort of process of transformation where a community can have some ownership of the change that happens. And in general of the middle path, whatever that looks like, and the sort of quality that can come from gentle density and gentle change.
I think middle housing can get a lot of naysayers on board because this scale of housing that we're talking about can be beautiful.
The real estate industry is giant and it moves slowly. So architects and planners are part of that, but you can't just have a planner change something and have it happen. There are not only builders and developers, but the banks play a large role. There are a lot of pieces of the real estate industry that don't like change because they've got a certain way of doing things. So where is the cadre of small builders that are going to build this? Where are the small property owners? So it's different than working with these giant organizations that are mobilized to put in big housing projects.
The cities in Washington are making changes that are far beyond, I think, what they had previously considered in order to plan for and accommodate housing. And this effort for the Danish Housing Lab is an opportunity to bring some models from Denmark for folks here to be able to see and experience and offer some insights into their own work. But it's also a way for professionals in Washington to sort of cross-pollinate and be able to share things that they're working on and provide some lessons learned for others as they start to embark on a similar effort. So it's really sharing ideas, information, and resources with folks working on housing issues.
There's so many ways to start tackling this. I think public pressure would be really good. And there used to be this thing called the Home Show or Street of Dreams, right? And they were giant, awful McMansions. But people would flock to come see the latest cool thing. I'd love to get a Street of Dreams with a different dream. That we could start having people understand that there were different ways of living that might be appropriate for them that they don't even know about or know that those options are available or could be available, and show that there's demand.